Oh, hello there. Yes. Well, turned out all stormy again, didn't it? Yeah. Ooh, it's been a bit of a washout of a summer one way or another. Still, that's what you get at the end of an ice age, I suppose. All those methane spikes. Yeah. Odd stuff going on. Yes, we're still officially in an ice age. We managed to hit that right, humanity. Who knows, man, how many past civilizations were ruined by the weather, eh? Yeah, maybe this one will be as well. Anyway, leaving that aside, fearless journalist yesterday at the Daily Telegraph managed to figure things out that, the rest of us spotted several weeks ago, because I think we pay more attention to our Twitter feeds than they do. But anyway, they discovered that there was a nefarious, I tell you, nefarious is going to be my word of the day, obvious plot by Palestinian action terrorists to get themselves arrested. Yes, it's a classic terrorist trick, that one, isn't it? Yeah, whereby they decidedly get themselves arrested. You might think of the 1916 Easter Rising, when loads and loads of members of the IRA went to the post office and deliberately got themselves arrested. Or you might well think of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, which started the First World War because he had to get out of his car and make an arrest. Yes, or something. Yes, anyway, brilliant tactic. Anyway, the Daily Telegraph has discovered, utilising the power of looking at Twitter, that loads and loads of people have decided to defy the law. You might think that that's a good thing to defy the law, but it only works if you're standing outside a hotel and people are turning up in masks who are definitely Antifa and not fascists and getting themselves arrested just to make you look bad, or something from Alison Pearson, fearless journalist that she is. But yeah, it just strikes me as really bizarre. And then the Daily Telegraph, having discovered this nefarious plot just by looking, has decided to double down and insists that the police should arrest all these people, which is definitely a very good idea because we can't let the terrorists win. So I'm sure that'll be a good look from the government. Bringing a bad law tends to go AWOL, doesn't it? Yeah, I'm reminded of the brilliant law that the Tories brought in to ban rave music. Yeah, music characterised by a series of repetitive beats, and you may remember how much it stopped people dancing, or something. Anyway, Nigel Farage from yesterday has decided that he wants to go for US-style supermax prisons. He's got himself another couple of ex-Tories on board, so you know that that'll work very, very well and won't just mean an awful lot of profits for somebody in the private sector. No, because that isn't the way modern government works. And speaking of which, to the nub of the matter, we had a lot of stuff about how government works yesterday. There is no real understanding of the British economy, or indeed the economy, or indeed economies in the British media, or indeed amongst British politicians, or indeed I think amongst most British economists, because we still live in this fantasy land whereby whenever the government wants to buy something, they have to go under the bed and look in the box and see how much money there is and decide whether or not they can buy something. Yeah, and they get the box out and they count the money. They have to decide what they can afford, right? Okay, that's our standard view that we're presented by all of our political parties and most of our political commentators and an awful lot of our economists as well, who insist that that model of the world is one that works because there's all this money, right? Okay, which comes from out there, and the government has to get hold of that money before it can do anything, right? Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's a world where mortgages don't exist, okay? Yeah, if you want to buy a house, you've got to put the money in the box. When you've got enough money for in the box, then you can buy the house. You see? It's just simple economics, isn't it? Yeah, every housewife would know that, as Margaret Thatcher might have said. But, of course. Some links down below if you want to have a look at some stuff about economics. Anyway, we are now once again angsting about debt, which is a very odd thing, and deficits, which, let's face it, most people don't know the differences between the two, and sometimes it's a bit hard to get your head around it, but it's worthwhile. But that isn't the way that government works. Just want to make that really, really clear, because we had the spurious notion of Tories from the last 14 years in government arguing about things. Come on to Kemi Badenoch in a moment, but we had Liz Truss, who was getting all upset because Kemi Badenoch apparently, even though she was in the government, decided that the last government was a bit naff at economics, which they certainly were. the reason why we're here. But Liz Truss got upset about that because apparently there was all of these problems with the wonderful things that she was doing, and she was completely powerless because she was only the Prime Minister to do anything about it. Yes, and anyway, I don't know. This woman has made an absolute fortune since she stopped being Prime Minister, for that lettuce amount of time. And she's still somebody that the right cling to as a perfect model because of the tax cuts. Yes, I know, I have to mention that, don't I? But it's worthwhile just having a quick look at... It's worthwhile just having a quick look at the Kemi Badenoch model of the world, okay? She posted this up on Twitter, okay? Picture the scene, okay? Picture the scene. A new Prime Minister and Chancellor spending billions without making the necessary savings to offset their splurge and balance the books. The markets react adversely, interest rates spike, and the cost of living gets worse with prices soaring. Now, what Kemi Badenoch has done there, of course, is give you that standard "we've got that box of money" view of it. So, in other words, whenever we want to spend money from the government, what we have to do is we have to go to the banks and ask them for it, because banks hold the money. You have to keep that in your mind, okay? Yeah? And we have to balance the books, right? Okay? We can't spend more than we can afford. There's no such thing as a mortgage, right? Okay? Because we have to offset spending, no matter what it is, no matter where it is, through savings, right? Yeah? And you might think about that, like all that money that went into, our banking system and elsewhere in 2008. Yeah, we had to make savings there, didn't we? Which, of course, led us to where we are. And you might think about, the COVID spending, which led to... well, nothing at all, basically, apart from a vast amount of QE, which, according to people like Kemi Badenoch, must have meant that inflation peaked at about 9 billion%. No. Inflation is bad because commodity prices are very much going up and down because of price volatility, because of that, climate change things. Primarily, that's what that's about. Plus, there's still the ongoing effects of the war in the Ukraine. That kind of thing. Doesn't work that way. The markets react adversely, interest rates spike, and the cost of living gets worse. Yeah, you see, those three things are actually subtly, completely different from each other. But Kemi Badenoch and all of the rest of the political commentators and all of the rest of the political parties and all the rest of the mainstream economists don't want you to believe that anything can be changed about that. A simple look at historical debt in the UK tells you that all of those things are in no way, shape or form intrinsically linked. We're not Argentina, we're not Zimbabwe, we're not Greece, we are the UK. In many ways we're a bit like the USA and other countries with a sovereign and fiat currency. But that is too hard for you to understand. So Liz Truss and Kemi Badenoch have to pretend otherwise, because all of us are housewives that have to balance our books at the end of the week, lest our husband be cross. For all their mocking of Liz Truss, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have not learned the lessons of the mini-budget and are making even bigger mistakes. Okay, they continue to borrow more and more, unable and unwilling to make the spending cuts needed to balance the books. Yes. Now, historically, Britain hasn't balanced its books since ever. Okay? Ever. We used to, when we had kings that went across to France and, killed people on a regular basis, very often losing, because after all, France is owned by the French these days, so it was all a bit of a monstrous mistake. Back in those days, we needed, if we wanted to do that, as the king, if you like, to borrow that money up front. But then kings discovered that various people under early mercantile capitalism had found nefarious accounting measures whereby they could upfront the money, right? Okay, yeah. That's where a lot of our modern banking system comes from. A lot of people don't know that, but never mind that now. And suddenly they were able to, enjoy vast amounts of money up front without anybody having to go cap in hand to those pesky Magna Carta keen barons and the rest of them, right? Again, it's just a simple historical thing, but people in this country don't understand anything about that. Yeah, an awful lot of our banking system and an awful lot of our modern banking system in terms of trade was created in and around fairly nasty adventures in the British Empire and wars. That's why it's often called war capitalism. Anyway, let's try and move on. They continue to borrow more and more, unable and willing to make spending cuts needed to balance the books. Yeah, that's tosh. They are egged on by a left-wing reform party, yeah, me neither, chasing Labour votes with ever more outlandish promises of nationalisation and welfare giveaways. Yes, you see, we can't afford welfare because apparently we have to spend for it in real time. Except, of course, that isn't the way the economy works. We don't do that. We have a generational input whereby we know full well that people in the future will pay for the pensions of older people by working. That's the way it works. Anyway, leaving aside this, I mean, there's some links down below if you want to say, if you want to have a read a bit more about this. I do get bored with this notion that we must balance the books. Okay, governments don't ever balance the books. It's never realistically been a thing. And if you want to blame the Labour Party for spending too much money, historically the Tories have as well. Okay. You just look at the data, it's there. Anyway, leaving that aside, what we come down to, of course, is a fundamental view about the economy, because Liz Truss, Kemi Badenoch, and to a very large extent our current glorious Labour Party don't want to change the British economy at all. They want us to continue to have a low tax in real terms, low wage economy, and if anything goes wrong, they'll simply jack up interest rates and make you and I, simple working class folks, pay for it. Because the rich must never be allowed to pay for their own mistakes. And that's the way it works. And unfortunately, that's a can that's been kicked down the road for about 40 years now. And we are somewhat reaching, the end of the road in terms of when that can happen. If you want productivity to go up, it requires people to spend some money. There are three principal players who spend money in the economy. There's the government, there's business, and there's the people. And the people are flat broke. Apart from those people that want to buy a Matisse or a yacht, right? Flat broke. That's it, okay? Can't afford anything. That's the reason why pubs are closing. Not due to Rachel Reeves. It's simply the fact that we've had a low wage economy very badly, flatlining wages for at least the last 15 years, right? That's the reason. That's the reason. And we can't afford anything. So consumer spending is not going to lift the British economy. So business spending. Will business spending lift the British economy? No, it almost never does, because these people have got very, very used to paying people nothing. Why should I pay my workers more? I'll just pay them, dirt standard minimum wage, the minimum I can get away with. That's all I'm going to do, yeah? Doesn't matter if you've got a degree, you can just handle all that debt, which means you can't go to the pub. Oh, what a great system, right? So it isn't going to come from business either. They're not going to invest when they've got a pool of cheap labour. And when they haven't got a pool of cheap labour, they'll insist that the government brings in welfare cuts to make sure that there is a pool of cheap labour, because it doesn't really matter if people are mentally ill or die, because they don't pay for it, because they will then donate some money to the Conservative Party or the Reform Party, let's be clear about that, or the Labour Party, let's be clear about that, and make sure that they don't pay for it. So that money, that investment, that spending isn't going to come from those two sectors of the economy, which only leaves government spending. If you're going to insist that governments can't spend money, good. That's a very good idea. But where will the spending in the economy, which generates real wealth, because that's where wealth comes from, oddly, it isn't a guy who's weighing up whether or not to buy a new Lamborghini, where is that money going to come from? Well, you need a government that's going to decide, a la 1930s style depression, a la every depression ever, because Keynes was basically right. If you want to save capitalism, you have to spend money. It might just be an idea. And what you do is you get the government to decide to invest in a number of different things which aren't inflationary. Yeah, you have to watch a bit out for inflation. I'm not completely stupid. But we aren't allowed to do that in this country, because we aren't allowed to have a sensible discussion about where we might go with that. I'm kind of hopeful that we will get a a left-wing party with Jezza and the rest of them that might actually start to introduce that. But you can bet your bottom dollar that the British media will spuriously, or not so spuriously, decide to completely ignore it because it's stupid economics, because you've got the box under the bed, which means that until you've got enough money in the box, you can't buy a house, because that's reality. And that's what they'll go with. And anyway, if he did come to power, then they'll decide to bump him off like the generals threatened to do the last time around. Love playing games you can't win, eh? Still, never mind. Kemi Badenoch, in a few years' time, will be able to write her memoirs and go on the circuit and say about how nefarious people like me ruined it all for her. It wasn't just that she had no idea what she was talking about and was an intrinsically bad leader, and it won't have been that her and her mates just decided to basically run an economy into the ground on the backs of the poor and then basically run away laughing. No, that wouldn't be right, would it? Anyway, 15 minutes is enough of a rant. Do have a glorious, lovely, well, it shouldn't rain today. My cat's been out outdoors. It's back to his own self, which is quite good, I think. Anyway, I do get a row whenever he comes in just for some food. You can tell he's on the mend because he's basically outside, and even with a bit of rain, that isn't going to stop him. It's good. Anyway, on that positive note, do have a lovely balancing the books day, and remember, that you can't borrow money. It doesn't exist. Money doesn't exist. You can't get the Bank of England to make money and give it to the government, in inverted commas. Yes, all of that debt is to ourselves in the future. That's the way it works. If you've got a hole in the roof in your house, you can't afford to fix the hole in the roof. You just have to accept that the house will fall down, because that's modern right-wing economics, and by God, we're going to stick with that story until we all die of, well, probably hypothermia, let's face it. Oh no, okay, end of Ice Age. Maybe not. Take care.